affecting billions. According to the World Food Programme, 319 million people are facing acute hunger in 67 countries today. These stark and startling facts must give us all pause for reflection and thought. If we, as a community of nations, are serious about achieving common progress and prosperity for all, as envisioned in the Sustainable Development Goals, we must redouble efforts to strengthen multilateralism, solidarity, and shared action for all our people and planet. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Somalia, as a broad non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, is working tirelessly to promote the ideals and the values of peace, stability, and shared opportunities across the world. We are actively working with all Security Council members and the wider UN membership to find solutions for peace in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. Somalia remains deeply concerned by the continued suffering of the Palestinian people. The ongoing violence, displacement, and deprivation faced in the occupied territories, including Gaza, demand our collective conscience and urgent action. We call for an immediate and lasting ceasefire, unhindered humanitarian access, and renewed commitment towards the two-state solution as the only viable path for a just and lasting peace in the Middle East today. Somalia Security Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Somalia is a unique history of decisively transitioning from conflict to a brighter socio-economic and political and security future. Starting from 2012 is the history of a real national effort supported by truly committed international partners, many of whom are represented in this room today. In fact, Somalia is an evidence that multilateralism and global solidarity can make the world a better, safer, and progressive place. This lived experience is our own government's inspiration for a determinedly working for a more just, peaceful, and progressive world within the UN Security Council during our membership, because we know that we are truly better together. When we all work in unison at home, we are bravely fighting the last remaining pockets of international terrorism while building a strong and sustainable national security architecture. We are working closely with all our valuable international partners in defeating the violence, extremism, ideology, falsehoods, and illicit financial systems that facilitate global terrorism. As a result of our efforts in Somalia, our people and citizens across the world are safe today. Of course, while we remain grateful for all international support to combat terrorism, I strongly commend the unwavering commitment and courage of Somali security forces and the local community defense forces for their sacrifices, resilience, and success against Al-Shabaab and ISIS, the two most dangerous terror organizations in the world today. This will continue until we achieve complete victory and harmony in our country, our region, our continent, and the wider world. We must never give in to cowardly terrorists. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our government has embarked on a historic journey to undertake universal suffrage elections in Somalia for the first time in 57 years. Somalia was Africa's first democratic nation in the 1960s, and we are proudly returning to that path of inclusive governance once again. Today, our national election registration process is ongoing, and more than 40 independent political associations have registered to participate in the upcoming elections. Our national experience is that nothing is better than a people-centered, a people-led, guided by the rule of law to build a unified and prosperous nation in our country. Financing development, the sustainable development goals are the blueprint for achieving dignity, justice, and equality through real investment in human capital, job creation, and social protection for the most vulnerable in all our communities. However, it was very clear from the fourth Financing for Development conference in Seville earlier this year that the financing gap between our ambitions and the reality are very far apart. Today, developing nations are facing the terrible shock of high debt burden, higher cost of sovereign borrowing, and expenditure on recurrent shocks, which is impossible to budget for annually. The traditional economic model of forecasting predictable expenditure supported by clear revenue streams is no longer this simple. Governments of the developing nations are also now subjected to real-time investment cuts in core developmental activities, including health, education, and basic infrastructure. This is because of realignment of the already dwindling development assistance they use to receive from the developing nations. This is not sustainable, and if we, as a community of nations, are to achieve collective developmental progress together, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in Somalia, we are taking responsibility of our own economic development by building on the successes of our recent reform based on the debt relief. Today, we are focused on mitigating the excruciating cost of public service investment by continuously raising domestic revenue, strengthening public financial management systems, and enforcing strict expenditure controls while enhancing transparency and accountability. Furthermore, we are committed to benefiting from strategic location and natural resources through trade with our region and the world. In line support of this ambition, Somalia has joined the East Africa Community and is ratifying the African Continental Free Trade Area policies and joining World Trade Organization. Process is going on very well. Climate emergency, we are also resolute in our commitment to combat the devastating impact of climate change in the most vulnerable communities, especially those who are unable to mitigate and adapt effectively. Climate change is wreaking havoc across the world, with the most vulnerable countries suffering systemic and repetitive meteorological and socio-economic shocks. These devastating economies, destroying livelihoods and diverting limited public resources towards mitigating and adaptation responses, which take away from other vital social investment like education and health. The impact of climate change is forcing governments in developing countries, including my own, to make impossible financial trade-offs, which hamper our own aspiration for investing in resilience and development. Around 10% of the developing nations' budgets are diverted to responding to climate change. This needs to be addressed urgently through developed industrialized nations by meeting their financial obligations for climate crisis. They continue to exacerbate the climate crisis that continue to exacerbate. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the resilient Somali people live with the climate crisis every day. For us, climate change is not an abstract. It is a horrible reality of disrupted and destroyed lives. Somalia's contributes almost nothing to global emission, yet we endure some of the harshest consequences. Droughts, floods, and rising seas erode livelihoods and displace families, threatening to undo the progress we are making towards peace and development. As a government, we understand that addressing the adverse impact of climate change is a global public good that requires strong partnership and genuine burden sharing. On our part, Somalia has adopted the national climate change policy, updated our national determined contribution, and is preparing its first biennial transparency report. We are also developing a robust national climate finance strategy to guide how we mobilize and manage resources to address the challenge. To ensure these resources are used effectively, we have established the National Climate Fund, a dedicated institution to channel climate financing transparently and directly to the communities on the ground, to the communities on the ground. We are restoring degraded lands, strengthening water security, and piloting nature-based solutions that protect both people and ecosystems. Despite our efforts, accessing climate finance remains too slow and complex. As our government strengthens its domestic revenue capacity and initiates the process for pre-arranging disaster risk financing, we call for financial support that is accessible, affordable, predictable, and just from the international financing institutions and capital markets. Nations on the front line, like Somalia, cannot be left to face this crisis alone, unsupported by the dominant global financial architecture, which is not fit for the purpose in this age of great challenge. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, the 80th anniversary of the UN General Assembly is the best possible opportunity to take stock of our global achievement as far as our common commitments to sustainable development are concerned. We quietly transitioned from the Millennium Development Goals to now the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I wonder, with the clock rapidly ticking very fast towards 2030, what the next acronyms of our global development aspirations will be. For us, being better together means common ownership, common responsibility, and genuine partner sharing on the global achievement of sustainable development through investment in a resilient and fair future for all. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federal Republic of Somalia. And now the Assembly will hear an address of His Excellency Jakub Mitovic, President of Montenegro. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to convey my warmest congratulations to Her Excellency Anna-Lena Baerbock on her election as the President of the 80th session of the General Assembly. This election is both historic and inspiring, as she is only the 5th woman entrusted with this very high responsibility. We recall Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit from India, who spoke with the voice of a liberated Asia. Angie Brooks, a Liberian diplomat and the judge, who who championed the rights of small states and women in Africa. Haya Rashid Al Khalifa from Bahrain, who brought a message of dialogue and international law from the heart of the Middle East. And Maria Fernanda Espinosa from Ecuador, who raised her voice for climate action and indigenous people of Latin America. And each of them left a mark of their time. So this election gives Europe the opportunity to embody the principles of the unwavering defense of human rights and multilateralism. Dear colleagues, this year, as we commemorate 80 years since the founding of the United Nations, we reflect on the remarkable journey of this great organization that was created as a mission of global peace. Born from the ashes of the Second World War, the United Nations emerged as a beacon of hope for humanity. Dear colleagues, imagine the devastated cities throughout the world back in 1945. Warsaw, reduced to ashes. St. Petersburg, shattered after the years of the siege. Berlin, in ruins. Hiroshima and Nagasaki struck by the unimaginable horror. And my hometown and the current capital of Montenegro, Podgorica, was also in the bombings virtually razed to the ground. And imagine at the same time the world leaders gathered who, despite their wounds, looked to the future. And at that very moment, when the trenches between nations still existed and the graves of the loved ones were still fresh, the Organization of the United Nations was born. The idea that light could emerge from darkness and that solidarity could triumph over despair. Despite the unprecedented destruction, the idea of peace and unity triumphed over division and hostility. The leaders of that time understood the urgent need for a strong global organization capable of preventing all future wars and fostering cooperation among nations. As part of the former Yugoslavia, Montenegro was among the founding nations of the United Nations. We have so far established an international system that promotes peace, upholds rules-based global order, safeguards human rights, and fosters sustainable development. Dear colleagues, without the United Nations, much of our collective progress would have remained just a distant dream. Yet, even after 8 decades, we must also acknowledge a sobering truth. The absence of the World War has not always meant the presence of genuine peace and prosperity in the world. Today, multilateralism is being tested like never before, and our world is confronted with devastating conflicts, rising polarization, grave human rights violations, deep economic inequalities, and the corrosive spread of disinformation. Those challenges remind us of one essential fact. We cannot afford the marginalization of the United Nations, nor the silencing of the international law. Dear colleagues, now more than ever, we need to renew our commitment to the founding principles of the UN Charter. And despite its imperfections, the United Nations remains the only global organization where every nation has a seat and a voice, and where international law remains the basis for international legitimacy. And that makes the United Nations indispensable. Ladies and gentlemen, since regaining our independence back in 2006, Montenegro worked hand in hand with the United Nations to advance reforms in sustainable development, human rights and good governance, and in line with our European Union membership aspirations. Next year, we will proudly mark 2 decades of regaining our independence, as well as 2 decades of our UN membership. So over the past 20 years, Montenegro has evolved into a modern democracy. This transformation is also reflected in our economy, which has grown steadily, driven by key sectors such as tourism and energy. Our resilience has been tested by many global crises. Yet, Montenegro remains firmly committed to building a knowledge-based economy that fosters sustainable development and contributes to regional stability and regional prosperity. Montenegro's commitment to the United Nations and multilateralism remains a cornerstone of our foreign policy, fully in harmony with our European and Euro-Atlantic paths, and our dedication to good neighborly relations and regional cooperation. With NATO membership as the pillar of our security, our strategic focus is now on joining the European Union by 2028. It's an ambitious goal, dear colleagues, yet one that is now firmly within our reach. And as the most advanced EU candidate country, Montenegro remains steadfast in implementing structural reforms and fully aligned with the European Union's common foreign and security policy. We are convinced that the EU integration is a catalyst for lasting progress, stability, and ultimately security of the European continent. And in this process, Montenegro is not only a beneficiary, but also a contributor, demonstrating that enlargement strengthens the European Union as much as it strengthens the candidate countries. Your Excellencies, to strengthen multilateralism, we also must confront its weaknesses. The Security Council is increasingly paralyzed and unable to fulfill its mandate as the primary guardian of peace and security. The latest example is the war in Ukraine, which has brought unimaginable suffering to the people of Ukraine. And Montenegro welcomes recent diplomatic efforts of the international community led by the United States aimed at achieving a just and lasting peace. And we sincerely hope that these efforts will succeed. At the same time, Montenegro is deeply concerned about the unfolding humanitarian suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza. And we call for an immediate ceasefire. Montenegro also strongly condemned the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas on October the 7th, 2023, and calls for unconditional release of all hostages. Montenegro has consistently supported a peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on the two-state solution in full accordance with international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. And this is why we also endorsed the New York Declaration on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. Dear colleagues, dear delegates, Montenegro fully supports the implementation of the UN Pact for the Future as well as the Seville Compromise, a renewed global commitment for financing sustainable development as important steps in strengthening our collective capacity to respond to global challenges. And we also believe that the upcoming second World Summit for Social Development must move decisively beyond reflection and analysis and deliver concrete, tangible solutions that will improve lives of people across.
Если вы одобрите, будем работать.
Как вы с Владимировичем держите, так?
Я живу.
Ждем призыва.
Much remains